Joining us live from our studios in Kano to discuss this is a senior lecturer in political science at the Bayero University, Kano, Professor Saidu Dukawa. A pleasure having you with us on the news at 10.
It's a pleasure.
Now, the idea of a development commission is to fast-track development across geopolitical zones. Would you say this objective has been achieved in the country?
Well, your listeners have been told why the Niger Delta Development Commission was formed. So also why the Northeast Development Commission was formed due to the crisis situations in those regions. But when one looks at the pace of development, one can hardly be satisfied with these commissions. The justification for extending such commissions to all geopolitical zones is not really quite clear. All the issue that is talked about is development. But in the first place, why the need for that? Is it a consensus of the people? If so, how was it arrived at? Or is it a development, a consensus of the ruling elite? And if so, how rational is it? How justifiable? And there are even more questions really to answer if one is to understand all these calls for development commissions, this development commission, that.
Yes, indeed, Prof.
If each... Come on?
Yes, indeed, Prof. You were saying there are a lot of questions because it's also argued that the clamor for development commissions by zones is as a result of the failure of the federal government to adequately address the issue of development. So do you agree with this?
No, not at all. I see it merely as a competition of the ruling elite to have more access to state resources, or perhaps as an agenda to achieve a restructuring of a kind, which has been pushed for a long time without success. For if you have development commissions in each geopolitical zone, some of the questions that will arise include how they can get their funding. You see, when listening to Senator, the senator from Southwest, when pushing the bill, he was talking about getting funds from the federal government and managing them, at the same time talking about mobilizing resources within the region to develop the area. And these are conflictual. If you talk about getting funds from the federal government, it's like you are talking about federalism. When you are talking about mobilizing resources in the region, you are talking about confederalism because you are talking about resource control. And this is conflictual. Also, questions such as when they are instituted, how do they relate with the center? And how do they relate with each other? How do they relate with the outside world? And in case of conflicts among them, who settles them? In an attempt to answer all these questions, you will see that it's either you will talk about more involvement of federal government in coordinating them, in which case you are back to square one. Or you may talk of more autonomy to each region regarding its own pace of development, in which case you are pushing the country to confederalism. And that's why some of the distinguished senators argued that this is an exercise directed towards balkanizing the country. And I think they are more right than wrong.
Now, briefly now, Prof, quickly tell us, do you think it's better to strengthen those ministries, departments and agencies financially and administratively to enable them function better that's going forward now?
Certainly. An array of institutions does not help in any way. For instance, they are talking about more development of agriculture. Then what will the Federal Ministry of Agriculture be doing and other state ministries of agriculture? They are talking of industry. What about other ministries of industry and both at state and local government levels? And see the array of institutions in the Niger Delta, and still the hues and cries in that region are there. By the time you have additional institution, you are only creating role conflicts, and unless they are talking about having more opportunities to access national resources so that they share among themselves. But as far as development issue is concerned, it's not a problem of institutions. It's a problem of the character and attitude of the ruling elites. They have failed to deliver good governance, and they are pushing the blame elsewhere.
Professor Saidu Dukawa, it was a pleasure sharing your thoughts with us on the News at 10.
It's also my pleasure.